I think of the life of the miner who must work all his day underground, where his lamplight is all that will shine there, and it's dark and it's damp all around. It is 2 or 3 miles to the coal face, and the tunnel is jagged and low, but he cannot find work on the surface, so it's down in the mines he must go.
You're very welcome once again to the Leydon Mining Experience, where we are continuing on with our series of interviews with men who would have worked in the Leydon mines over the years. Well, I'm delighted to welcome this evening Dermot Leydon. Dermot, you're very welcome. Thank you so much indeed for joining us. Great to have you on board. You mentioned there, Dermot, just a couple of minutes ago about the landslides, and there was always a danger around the pits as well, you know, of accidents or whatever. Any near misses, anything that ever frightened the living daylights out of you?
It was funny actually when you mentioned that, to talk about how, you know, it's the things that you don't kind of think about or even dial in are the ones usually can catch and be the most dangerous. I was very lucky. I never really had that close of a call actually working underground in the mines, but we were called over, and as I said, I'd be the jack of all trade. It reminded me of the TV series, The Dukes of Hazzard. And somebody asked, what did the Duke boys do? And they said, depends on what day of the week you're asking. And it was me, you know, it depended on what day of the week. And this was a massive charge of explosives that were putting in at the open cast, Leydon's open cast, as we would say on Lynch's Mountain, would be, you know, on Lynch's Pit. It's Spy Cop area there on the map. But we were putting in an exceptionally large charge of explosives, and they had a machine, a drilling rig that bored big deep holes into the rock face, and the explosives came in big tubular bags. You know, there were a long bag packed with gelignite, and you had to be very careful working with that, because actually the TNT in it is used and was used in heart condition tablets for angina, and they open up the veins on that end, right? But that opening up causes a rush of blood to the head, and you'll get a blinding headache if you get gelignite, especially on your if you get it on your hands, you're inclined to rub your face, and you could be very sick with that. So you were wearing gloves and protecting yourself right from the gelignite, and that would get on what they call the stim, and we had literally a battering ram pushing in the explosive, right?
And this was a very big explosion.
It was a massive explosion,
okay.
And actually we had the Irish Army would be out. The Army were there protecting it, because we'd had to leave it overnight and get filling the explosives the next day. So you're talking about putting tons of explosives into a rock face. And that was fine anyway. We got everything done, and we went back to what we thought was a safe area. And we let off the explosion. And, you know, it's not that dramatic of a thing when it's explosive confined in the rock, you know, yourself on the quarries. But you only start to realise then when you heard the thunder kind of reverberating around the valley, and every dog that was within 5 miles was barking. But the next thing, we were like in a war zone. What had happened was one of the charges had blown tons and tons of rocks, maybe a couple of 100 feet in the air, and we now had flagstones falling all around us. And it's a strange decision in knowing where your luck is. Do you move? You could walk into the baton. Do you stand still and just
wait for one to drop?
Wait for one to drop. And so all you could do was just keep an eye up and wait. And these things were, they were going by you like bullets. There was ones falling like mortars. It was the first time ever I realised what it was like to be for somebody to be in a war zone, and it's the same thing, you know, flight or fight or that. And that was the closest one I ever got to You know, that experience of something.
Explosives, when the explosives would be brought in like that, and the army would come and stay with them overnight when you waiting for you to fill them the next day. This was all taking place, I would presume, in the backdrop of the troubles of Northern
Oh, yeah.
Ireland, which was only really effectively a few miles down the road.
Incredible, yeah. It was, yeah. And, you know, you tried to keep control over the explosives. But there was always this problem where we'd actually, if you were working, as they say, as a corper, right, the brushing, which was the stones and that, the surplus stones from when you drove the tunnel forward, you built as much as you could back where the coal was. But you know, like in any case, if you dig a hole, there's always surplus. So there was surplus stone, and there was all stuff we called da, which was a bad breed of shale that sat underneath the coal. And that was not great for what they call stone, putting the stone one side, like to build this up. And actually, as an aside to that, a lot of men, when the mines closed, went out and they were brilliant stonemasons and stone workers. And that was because there's miles and miles of brilliant dry stone building in the mines.
Yeah.
No one will ever see. It's there propping up where the coal actually was.
And we even heard from Michael Leydon and his dad telling this story. I think Michael actually was brought in one time by a miner himself, and he told this story. The pride that the miners had in these buildings. No one was ever going to see them. They were going to be covered. But there was great pride in the way that they were able to build these things.
Absolutely, you know, and that was a thing of that era, that pride in your work. And as I mentioned, the mines were so temporary, but yet everything had to be industrial strength. But yet you put it in with the mind that that was all going to be, you know, taken apart, like the rails would be lifted, all the supplies, the compressed air and electricity. But anybody, you were just on about the explosives, that was always a legacy danger for the men that were brushing. It was an art in itself, detonating the explosives to blast the rock. And you'd have misfires. And so they'd have to pick up the sticks of gelignite that had been in a hole and leave them on site. And every stick was numbered. So we had to, when you arrived at the bag of explosives, have a sheet and mark down the numbers of each stick, and then that had to be accounted for as being exploded. But there'd be ones that misfired, and even the lads coping out on the hill, that would be part of their job too, would be retrieve, you know, sticks of gelignite that didn't explode, and they'd have to be brought back. And that's the term, the firesman in the mine, of course, comes from the fact that he was the man that was in charge of firing the explosives. And you know, you had to have a system.
Yeah, and that's a very interesting one that you're after mentioning there now, because it's come up a couple of times already. You know, the ganger, the foreman, would have the name of a firesman, and I think it was almost jokingly said that, well, he was the one that gave your P45 and he was the firesman. But they got the title from having that, which was a big responsibility over the explosives that would be used.
Huge responsibility, and they, you know, they were the men that if explosives were found in the wrong place, you know, there was a number connecting you, and then naturally enough you'll be in the firing line.
Exactly, it's yeah.
So there was a lot of responsibility, and making sure, you know, that the area was clear, and you know, when it was fine, when it was an evening explosive blasting, you know, where the men had gone out and everything was done then very much in a system, and everyone knew their job and where they were going, because you had a man that was doing the boring, and he had a rig that drilled the holes, and every tunnel in the mine was numbered. Every branch had a number over it, and that's how we worked. You know, 23 had to get, you know, a bag of gelignite, and you went in, and then you made sure that 23 and 24 and 25 were definitely clear, and then there was regulation lengths for the fuse. We used strum, as we called it, and that burned, if I recall, a foot a minute, and there was a minimum of 3 foot of a fuse that gave you 3 minutes from lighting the shot, as they'd say. And the length of fuses then, to stagger a blast, was very important as well because, you could, if you timed it wrong, blow out the fuse on the other shot or not get the blast that you wanted to kind of, in a way you were chipping away just on a bigger scale. So there was a huge amount of skill from marking the holes where the shots went in to putting the explosives in. But sometimes there'd be a stub of coal that, and it might have, because we have a huge amount of iron ore in the mountain, and they used to call them bullets, but this was a lump of iron ore. And it was iron, which meant that you could do nothing with it.
Yeah.
And if the machine itself, there was like a big chainsaw, if the teeth of that hit it, that would bend and break teeth, and you'd be at a standstill. And the only way to deal with that was with an explosive and blast it out. And there'd be other reasons as well, but that'd be a primary reason. So that might be going on during work time, and it'd be time maybe that the lads would move to a different section of the mine while that was being blasted. And that was very hard, to control, because you have the reek. Sorry, John. The smoke of an explosive is absolute poison. It's the most dangerous stuff. That was the killer in the mines. You had rock dust, you had coal dust, and you had the smoke from the explosive itself.
I was just going to make the point to you, there was an awful lot of manual labour. There was an awful lot of skill and guile needed in other jobs as well, and you very elegantly described a lot of those there. So those type of blasts that would have taken place, what type of tonnage would we be talking about, say, an average roughly, that when you'd have a blast, what type of tonnage of coal could it give you? I know you had to take out the rock or whatever.
You were talking about, I was surprised, a place maybe 15, 16, a good place could be 25 tonne. And rock, of course, would be much heavier. Now, because of that, it was called brushing. And that came back from, I was on about how they left behind the loose coal. So you brush that out of the way, kind of, and that's where the term, but it was much heavier work than having a switch and brush. But they were paid by the yard. So each yard that the tunnel advanced, it would be understood, because the boarding rig that we used had basically a 3 foot, 1 yard depth of a drill. So that took 3 sticks of gelignite, and so when you let off an explosion, you took 1 yard of brushing out, and there could be maybe 3, 4, 5 places. So there could be 5 yards of brushing that needed to be done to advance. So they, as again, would try and build back as much of that back to where the coal was, but the surplus then went out. And when you talk about complication, sometimes the brushers might take out coal as well. So you had to have a pin and a weight for that. They might have 9 yards of brushing, we'll say, and 5, 6 hutches of coal.
Of all of that. So that could have complicated it a little bit. Let's maybe move now, say, towards the end of the mines. And you had the vision at the time, when it was all coming to an end, to shoot some great video footage.
That's right. Now, that came about. Now, it was Sean Flynn.
That had but you had some of the videos as well there that you compiled at that stage.
That actually, videos and stills, and there's some of that used and shown here at the mining experience. Now, at that stage, I have to put in my brother Terry, would have been heavily involved in that. And actually, at that time, when the mines closed, I was working on local radio, and I was gone, Well,
you gone long before the mines closed.
I was, yeah. I worked on and off. Now, I did work later on. I kind of, when I got married, and I expected the mines to close in '85. And I got married then, and I moved on, and I was, at that time, doing hugely involved with at that time, the Pirate Radio. So I was out on the music scene and the radio scene at that stage. But I mean, the thing was that Flynn's was a family business, and I was able to come and go, and so if there was something on, I'd go up and so I could just slot in, put on the overalls and go down and work on something I might be there a week, I might be there a month, you know,
Ad hoc basis.
completely ad hoc, you know, and that's how and then like a lot of things, you know, as the work tapered down and things, that there was new men came in, I just stopped working there, and it was kind of a weaning process more than anything else. But it to me, on the music scene, they used to always say it was not a shock that the Beatles split up, but it was a total shock that the Rolling Stones stayed together.
Yeah.
You know, and it wasn't a shock to me that the mines closed in Rigna. It was kind of amazing that they managed
To keep it going to 1990.
till 1990.
When you were combining both, and Terry, who we've interviewed, your brother here as well, he told us a kind of humorous story once or twice. The two worlds will collide. Now, obviously, maybe when you'd be coming out of the mines, you wouldn't go to a gig like that. But maybe some of the other ways coming back from a gig, maybe they could have got on fairly late, and something was wrong in the mines early the next morning. There was a quick turnover.
Oh, there was, yeah. The only thing about the mines was the work was so hard. There was something about it. Because you were in sort of nearly adrenaline mode, a lot of the times the real fatigue would hit you, you know, when you got home again. But that happened on a regular basis. And actually, combining the two things, when I was working there in the early 80s, the CB radio was really popular. And where we were at Gobarotha, you couldn't talk on the CB round to Cross Hill. But I had a great friend passed away now, John Morris, that lived in Drumshambo, and they had McKenna's shop there at the time. And he had a CB aerial on the house, and I was able, from one spot, to get through to Drumshambo. And I'd message John, and I would be going off to Sligo to buy records, and I'd make a quick run down to the house, and John would probably make his way out to the house in Cross Hill. But I'd CB John in Drumshambo and tell him, look, I've got finished early enough here. We'll let them know I'm on the way. And he'd CB, he could get from Drumshambo to the house in Cross Hill, no problem. And Dad was a great man for having I had a home base set like at the house. He was a great man for answering it, and he'd say, yeah. But here's a connection that you would never think about. Whatever was to where the house was, and I had a very good area that was made by the Shakespeare company that normally make fishing rods. But it, for some reason, had this clear-cut line to Fermanagh and Enniskillen. And I could talk to somebody in Enniskillen town or Fermanagh, Irwinstown, all around there, as clear as I could talk to somebody in Drumshambo.
Yeah.
And we finally met up, and we had a common thing, and we talked about the height of the Troubles, and the rally sport united all. Sport is a great thing, like whether it's football or in this case rally, and it unites people from completely different backgrounds that you would think should be loggerheads with each
A
other.
little bit like rugby as well, when you had an All-Ireland team with even when the Troubles were in the height.
It was seen that was a common thing, and the rally sport meant that I got chatting with these lads out there, and they were stone mad into the rally, and I loved the motorsport because the Circuit of Ireland used to come through Arigna here, and we had all sorts of service stops, and it was fantastic, and it was a golden age of rally cars, you know, with the big high-powered machines like the Audi Quattros and all that. The sound of an Audi Quattro coming through Arigna, I still remember it. Just one of those.
Yeah, magic
things. You know?
Yeah.
And so I met up with the lads at rallies, and I had to bring them to my house to show them, and they had a fella back at base, and they talked, and they just
couldn't believe it.
Here? Like it was a voodoo.
Yeah. Is it true that close enough to the site of another coal mine at Rock Hill that you were able to get through to some guy in Italy or something one night?
Absolutely, yeah.
On the CB.
On the CB, that's the case. We had a friend who had invested in an aerial, and he didn't realise at the time how big this aerial was. This thing was about 15 foot high.
And did he put it on a car? Or
what we had to do is we actually had a pole with us, and we had to see we were able to put on the bing at Rock Hill on the shale, push that down into a hole, after we had mounted the aerial on it, right? And not alone were we with this high-powered aerial, but another one had brought called Heat, which is a 100-watt linear amp. Well, we only worked on around 3-4 watts, you see, normally. So we were putting 100 watts into a high-gain aerial.
You were nearly able to contact Mars at this stage.
I wasn't going to be surprised that the UFOs from Boyle were something to do with our early attempts. Yeah, and we got talking.
And you made contact with a fellow in Italy.
We did make contact with all over, and somewhere in the background there's a sort of a thing with ham radio where it started, called the QSL card, where you send a postcard from your area confirming that, you talk to this person. The ham people would have their number. On the CB, we used a handle, as it was called, so everyone had a code name.
Right.
And actually, I was on about earlier there about the motorbike I done up. My father seen me coming down from the mines on this motorbike, and he said, fallen star now is all you could compare this bike tearing down the crosshalls. And so that was my handle on the CB.
On the CB. Well, you know the way everyone has handles nowadays on Twitter and their Twitter handle and whatever. It just shows that you were well ahead of the curve and you had all these. But the CBs were absolutely brilliant at the time, and it was a great way of communicating. As we mentioned, we spoke and we've interviewed Terry in the past as well about the times in the mines. Your other brother, Brian, he would have wrote in some of his books and given some descriptions about the mines as well. So I suppose they probably life in Arigna at that stage, but very much focused around the mining. And that would have played a part maybe when he was compiling some of the early walks that he did.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the last of the mining villages, right? That was a Francis McManus award-winning story, and it captures so perfectly now. He was writing nearly in the present, if you know what I mean, but it's such a time capsule of that kind of hushed air of wealth that was in the church, on Sunday, and it captures that feeling of what mining was like in Arigna back in I would say. The story came out in 1988, so it'd be around that period. But Brian tells a good one about when he won the award, and we didn't have a landline in the house at the time, and so a message would come to the post office in Arigna, and it was Bridie Flanagan was on the exchange at the time, and so the phone call comes in. Hello. This is RTE calling about Brian Leydon, and all she could say is, "What's he done now?" So that was a note and a line on it. But it was funny. I think a little bit of the observer side of things comes from the fact that our dad came down from Roscommon, and that was through the connection of the lorries coming from Arigna as supplying the coal to the various places like the hospital and the home in Roscommon, and he'd get a lift down with the Arigna lorry.
He came as a gardener, a groundsman, didn't he originally?
He worked as a gardener for the Leydons, and he that's how he came first to Arigna just out of curiosity and inquired, I think maybe about the job, but that's how he came there. And then, like, I grew up in the very centre of Arigna in the bungalow, and that's all. It's amazing that's a survivor, that house was taken down to extend the briquette factory.
That's right.
But it actually was rebuilt over in Mayo, and still, that house still survives. But the earliest picture of me, like, is in front of the house there with the siding in the background. Now, I remember clearly the aerial rope, the clickety-clack of that, and as I grew older, we would be going up to Cross Hill, where we eventually moved up there because my grandfather was up in the years and wasn't able to run the land. And like with my uncle, who would have been the eldest, that would have been looking after the farm, he had immigrated to America like everybody else in the 50s. So we would be walking up from the bungalow and you had to cross underneath the aerial rope system. And I used to be so afraid of that. I could not get out from under that
Quick enough.
quick enough,
Yeah.
you know. So I grew up.
But in many years later, you were doing the survey for those going to bring it across the
Isn't
same
it
way.
amazing how,
Yeah,
how life goes on? You nearly couldn't stick to it myself.
Yeah.
But, you know, growing up at the bungalow, it gave me, I think there's something there that gives me that taste for history.
Yeah.
Because there was an awful lot of echoes of previous things like the ironworks. And I remember we could go over to the remaining walls of, it was only part like of the walls of the ironworks, and play at them. And what really had a big impression on me was the narrow gauge railway. And we mentioned the siding, as we'd say, but that was a siding for the C&L line. Mm-hmm. And there, left in the field just in front of the house, was the turntable that was used to turn the engine around, because it was a spur line, just one rail. So the train came up.
All the carriages would have been off at this stage.
And the carriages they would have been left behind at the Plunkets, as we always called it, the station house in Arigna, or in Mount Allen, down Ahafin, Mount Allen. And that's where the passenger line terminated. And there'd be empties left there from previously. It would bring up the empties and bring back down the full coal. So the turntable was I remember as well, was there. And actually, Terry preserved that on video. There is a video actually of the remains of the actual turntable that was used. And I played on the carriages that were left behind, the timber carriages that were left behind from the rolling stock. And they would have been passenger carriages that had made their way back up to be used as sheds. And my memory of that was wasps, because the resin in the wood was pure attraction for the wasps, and I'd be warned there was only a little scutcher going round, to keep away from them.
Yeah.
And so there was no-go areas on these carriages. But I remember walking down the railway line, where the rails and sleepers were gone at this stage, and what they'd left behind, the gaps, you could see these lovely like jewels. I was amazed and found out that this actually was melted glass and silica from the ironworks, and that the slag piles of that slag that was scraped off the top of the molten iron was brought down and used as a ballast between the sleepers, and all those connections. It left me the narrow gauge closed before I was born. It closed in '59. So I always liked the echoes of that and hearing them. My mother talked about how she had clean clothes out on the line at the bungalow. And the train would have used mostly Arigna coal. But for its final runs, they were using imported Polish coal. And there was huge black smuts came up out of this. And I always remember the only thing I remember is that the last running of the train was it ruined my washing.
Destroyed. It was a test for the dance of the day.
Of the day, yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting, Dermot, that you mentioned history and preserving history. And indeed now where people are going to be watching this interview is on the Miners' Way. They'll be able to scan their code, sit on a bench and listen to you and I reminisce about the mines. And I know you're a great advocate as well for the Arigna Miners' Way in maintaining the path that runs through your own land in Cross Hill. And that's very much, I suppose, the future now in many ways for Arigna. Tourism, active tourism, bringing people in, making the most of the absolutely fantastic views that's just the other side of this window. I know it's dark now and people can't see it at the minute, but there's no doubt about it. There's a huge potential there in that.
Oh yeah, I mean, when you're around about here, I might have been mentioned before, but a fella said, God, the cattle up there, they haven't much to eat. And it was said, but look at the scenery they have. Look at the view. She'd live on it. And what strikes me, I've absolutely love coming down working on the Miners' Way. And I often said it's like, if you haven't done one of these walks, it's for negative energy. If you want negative energy inside you, if you want to discharge it, definitely. Taking a walk through the scenery here and walking in the footsteps of generations before, and getting an idea of what life was like. Because I think I love to travel, but for me, travel, it's lovely to look at a place, but it's a totally different thing to be immersed, with the people and the culture, of that experience. And the more you can involve yourself, the more you're going to get back out of it. But I always think when there's one part, and we used to call it Dugan's Road, there was an old man lived in a house up at the top of the start of the Miners' Way on Cross Hill, as you come up through my land there. And what I was interested about, there's stories about people who walked through here, we'll say around the turn of the last century, and they were taken aback at how unchanged, the whole unspoilt and unchanged, the landscape was. And when you walk on in between sort of the banks there and the trees overhead, you're walking in the same situation that people walked in thousands of years before, not just hundreds. That I'm sure that path evolved, and that there was always people walking there. And if you come up near the top of that little part, there's the remains of an Iron Age farm. And you had quarrying going on there. As you know, that area was renowned for the flags that was taken out. And again, one of them yardens, there used to be a story about a fella had a quarry there. And there was a big, strong man, had a house down around Mount Allen area. And he was renowned for his strength. And he wanted a big lintel stone for his fireplace. And he came in, and the fellow that had the quarry said, if you're able to carry this out of here and put it on the cart, you can have it for free. And the story was that when the man had the stone on his back, that the quarry owner jumped up on top of the stone. And he still managed to carry all out.
He put an extra few kilograms on it.
He was tearing them. And that area has so much to it. And actually, when you look at the walls, I rebuilt some of the walls, and it's there in me that my paternal grandfather, he was a stonemason, and actually built the stonework there going into the graveyard in Roscommon. That's actually was some of the work he did. And then that was on that side. And then my grandfather's people, maternal grandfather, Henry Joe, he was related into the McManus family. There's a very strong McManus connection there. And they were all stonemasons. So, and they built a lot of the houses. And he used to tell the story, like, if you're ever building dry stone, a fella asked the mason, how much, I want to build a 2-room patched house. What'll I need in the way of stones? And he said, what you'll do now, he said, is you'll collect up as many stones as you can get your hands on. And when you figured you've piled up twice too many, you'll have exactly half enough.
Yeah.
That was the way that you...
That was the way the measurements worked.
So to fill in there, because they were dressing the flags up at the quarries there's handfuls and handfuls of chippings in between, used nearly as a mortar, in between the stones of the walls. And the walls are nearly all built out of the offcuts that you had squaring up the flagstones. So you have those lovely stone walls there, and that leads you up even to a sweat house. And they're very much of this area. North Leitrim and North Roscommon and South Leitrim have their sweat houses. And I'm very lucky to have an intact sweat house on that part of the walk as well.
Yeah.
And I feel like that. We were mentioning about worlds colliding, about you worked in the mines and I worked on radio, and the radio was very high pressure, and even you didn't think about the whole entertainment scene could be high pressure. And to get out in the countryside and to be there and to be here in Arigna, just looking down at that view of Loch Allen and Slieve and Earden, that remains unspoilt. And I often think, looking at it back, about the Crow mining and pylons would have put a different set on the view. So we have, like, on that, such unspoilt landscape, and it is so steeped in history. You're walking along there on you know, piles of the slates and that as you come over towards here, the spoil that was left behind from the mining, and to think about the generations of men that that came here and worked. So it's if you haven't done the miner's way, then it's a lovely experience.
Absolutely.
Waiting for you. I often think, when you see the landscapes that are fabulous, like Killarney, I often think to myself, something, we have as good here at home, and we don't promote it in the same way. It's one of those lovely hidden jewels.
Well, there's no doubt about it. It's important to preserve the history. It's important to remember the history of the mines, and I think you've done a fantastic job over the course of this interview of, looking back at so many practices which took place in the mines and so many memories from it. Final question. And I know when it came to break times in the mines, and everybody came out to the guy in the pit, there was always a bit of fun, there was always a bit of devilment. Is there a story, and I know I'm putting you on the spot here now, would there be a story that you can think of that's maybe suitable for video, or maybe a bit of that devilment that took place?
Yes, I mean, there would be almost a thing that there'd be a little bit of rising going on, that there would be inspectors from the social welfare going around. And I remember there was one man up just having the chat, and somebody said, there's a car down the road looks awful like one, and they're not all, I'm saying it for devilment. And they said, there's a car down the road there looks awful like an inspector. And it was like, crows out of a field, just boom, every man disappeared. And the only man that was left was this man, well in his 70s. And he said, well, be Jenny, says this terror. I'm the only man here that can be officially at the mines today, and me in my 70s.
Everyone else was exit stage left.
Exit stage left, There was a...
there were great memories of it. Well, look, you've preserved some of those memories as well through video. I know you've shown them on various websites as well. And there's a lot of interest on those, Dermot. You put them in those kind of memory radio sites and stuff that you have. Some of that footage is lovely to look back at it from round about that era. Absolutely.
And, we didn't think it at the time. No, you don't think it at the time that, history is made every minute. And it's funny, I mentioned something that I just took a quick look at the history of Flynn's and Gubberother, where I worked. And the funny one of this was, when I was working a while at the mine, until I realised, when you went in the entrance of the mine, on your right-hand side was another tunnel. And in the blackness, you wouldn't notice it, It was an empty, deserted tunnel. And there was a network of a maze of tunnels and shafts there, right? And I always used to think to myself, I knew that the mine I was in started in the 1970s with Tommy and Mick Flynn, really were the two men there. And I used to think to myself, they've done fierce work here since then. And I was only looking at the history of that mine in Gubberother started in 1854.
Yeah.
And we were actually, it was very clever the way it was done, we were mining in one of the mines, the top mine, number one, as we'll say, parallel to the old 1850s mine. And it was perfect for ventilation because it had all the air that was in that mine and air shafts. And we would push out a tunnel into the old workings, you see, which gave us a great flow of air. We'd put in a fan and you were blowing air out of the old mines, which had a massive reservoir of it. And I was just thinking about this, that if you think about it, successful life is having history parallel to you, not behind you, and learning from it and utilising the history. That, we tend not to do it, and I see it right now, broadcasting history being absolutely vandalised. And RTE have a lot to answer for. the Atlantic 252, the long wave mast. It was only built in 1989, but that's part of our broadcasting history. Athlone, they're just wiped out, demolished. What would be said if we demolished the GPO? You know, and say, this post is a thing of the past.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And for a generation, indeed, for my generation growing up, 252 was where it was the music radio of the time. Absolutely,
and that was all just very quietly destroyed. And I think that's an absolute shame. And it's funny, I'm a hoarder, you know, and that thing of having a love of history, you tend to hold on to stuff. But we had a lovely project only that COVID destroyed it, of remembering kind of the pirate radio days. And I actually put together a pirate studio. I managed to save, I don't know if you remember at the time, the cart players for the advertisements. You remember the NAB
I remember
carts?
them, yeah.
Yeah, so I preserved one of them players and using the reel-to-reel and all that, and the analog desks, and even an old medium wave transmitter. I've kept all that, and I see that as probably not as interesting right now to people, but as we move on, as you know, analog studio is a thing long in the past. We're all working off computer now. And that's what I think that and the Miner's Way Walk is a perfect example of keeping history parallel. Right there on your, you know, right beside you.
Absolutely. Well, look, there's some fantastic memories in it. Dermot, thank you indeed for sharing them all. And you know something, we'll sit down sometime and have a good chat about radio as well. But great to get your memories on the minds. Thank you so much indeed.
John, it was a pleasure.
I think of the life of the miner who must work all his day underground, where his lamplight is all that will shine there, and it's dark and it's damp all around. It is 2 or 3 miles to the coal face, and the tunnel is jagged and low, but he cannot find work on the surface, so it's down in the mines he must go.